Yeah, I use the word, devolution in several senses. The main sense that I use it in the book, Human Devolution, a Vedic alternative to Darwin's theory, is that we don't evolve up from matter, as many scientists now believe. Rather, we devolve or come down from a level of pure consciousness. So that's one sense in which I use the word, devolution. We haven't come up from matter, but down from a level of pure consciousness or spirit, if you like that word. So that's one sense in which I use the word. And then another sense I use the word is in terms of reincarnation, because I believe that the conscious self on this level of reality inhabits a material vehicle, that we call a body, but only temporarily. We see that, say, for example, the human vehicle that we have, it lasts a certain number of years, and then it breaks down. At that point, the conscious self would either go back to the level of pure consciousness where there is no need for any such vehicles, or if it hasn't gotten to that level yet, it will continue on in another vehicle, which may be a human vehicle, but if we haven't used the human vehicle properly, it could be another type of vehicle, an animal vehicle, for example. It's just like any vehicle. You require a license to operate it. For example, if you want to drive an automobile, you need an automobile license. If you want to fly an airplane, you need a pilot's license. If you want to be a ship's captain, you need a ship's captain's license. So to occupy a particular vehicle, one requires a particular license to operate that vehicle. So if we don't have the license to operate a human vehicle, then that means we'll be put in another type of vehicle. So that's another type of evolution or devolution. One can make progress in the cycle of reincarnation, going to, from lower forms of vehicles to higher forms of vehicles, or from lower forms of bodies to higher forms of bodies, or one can go back in the other direction, devolution. And in that sense, one can lose the right to occupy a human body and be placed in another kind of body that's more suited to the types of desires that the conscious self has.
But who do you think is overseeing that process?
I think there's a source for all conscious beings that's carrying on this process. There's a cosmic government, you might say, that's responsible for these things. Just like in our human societies, we see that certain people are responsible for carrying out different processes. Same thing is going on in the whole cosmic hierarchy of beings of which we're a part. We're not alone in the universe. There are other beings in the universe. It's interesting that even mainstream scientists like Hawking, that famous astrophysicist, the one who's in the wheelchair, little suffering from a disabling disease, Stephen Hawking. He's recently said, yes, there's extraterrestrial life. So I think we're not just alone in the universe. We're part of a whole cosmic society of beings, and in any society there's some system of government. It's so I think it works like that ultimately. So and then another sense I use the word devolution is in terms of the ongoing cycles of time. As you might know, and many of your listeners might know, a lot of my work is inspired by my studies in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, in which there's a cyclical concept of time. Time doesn't just go linearly; it goes in cycles, and this is a very common idea in many of the ancient wisdom traditions. Many people are talking about the Mayan calendar, for example, which has also this same concept of vast cycles of time. They believe, according to that calendar, the way many people read it, is that in the year 2012, it's going to be the end of one of the cycles and the beginning of another cycle. So the ancient Greeks and Romans and all types of people throughout history have had the idea of time going in vast cycles. So that is there in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India as well. And these cycles go in a certain sequence. They're called yugas, for example. That's one of the Sanskrit terms for the cycle of repeating cycles of ages. And there are basically 4 of them. They start out with a golden age in which everything on Earth is very environmentally perfect. People are able to live very simply and naturally without complex social structures and cities and things like that. But then as the cycles go on, things become progressively more materialistic and more elements such as conflict and competition and greed and exploitation and domination enter, until finally you get into the 4th age, which is called the Kali Yuga, in which these things exist in a very extreme form. And according to the Vedic cosmological calendar, we're now in the beginning of the Kali Yuga, and we can see with all the environmental disasters and natural disasters and human conflicts over material resources, we can see that these things are getting progressively more intense, and that's going to go on. That's going to go on until the end of the Kali Yuga, when another golden age will start. So in that sense, that's another sense in which I use the word devolution, in the sense that progressively, as time goes on, things are going to keep deteriorating until finally, in the course of cyclical time, another golden age starts, and then the process repeats, just as each year in the temperate climates we get spring, summer, fall, winter, and then again spring, summer, fall, winter.
Yeah.
So we have to we can't stop the seasonal changes, but we can prepare ourselves. We can adjust. Just because winter is coming, it doesn't mean you have to freeze to death. You can prepare yourself for it.
Yeah.
So those are the 3 different senses in which I use the word, devolution. Devolution in the sense that we've devolved or come down from some higher level of the cosmos. We've been put into this material level of reality where we have to function through the material vehicles that we call bodies, but ultimately we're from an entirely different level of reality. And this is, these sorts of ideas have been popularized a few years ago through films like the Matrix series, and more recently by the the Avatar film, where you have somebody, his consciousness is being projected into a body that exists on another planet, and he functions on that planet through that body. So basically, according to what I'm presenting in Human Devolution, is that we're all pretty much in that situation. All of us, for all of us, our consciousness has been projected down onto this planet into a material body in which we have to function on this level of reality. But ultimately, we have, as conscious beings, an existence on some higher level of reality.
In Avatar, Michael, we see this being used as in a form of a technology. They're using very advanced high technology to place this person into the body of someone else. Do you think that is actually what is happening in terms of our experience as well? Is this a literal computer game, if you want to look at it from that point of view, or do you think that this is a spiritual mechanism at play here? It's a still form of a technology, but it's more organic. It's a spiritual technology, if you will.
Yes, it's I would call it a spiritual technology, but there's a material element to it in this sense. Say as human beings, we're normally meant to live on the land. If we want to live in the water, then we need special vehicles that will allow us to function in the alien element of water. We need a diving suit or a submarine. Now, where do those diving suits and submarines come from? Well, they come from engineers who understand that if human beings are going to exist under the water, they need special vehicles that will allow them to do that. So they design and build these vehicles that we then can use to function in the water. So I would say, similarly, there are higher intelligences in the cosmos that understand that if human beings, which are ultimately beings of pure consciousness, are going to function in the world of matter, they need vehicles that will allow them to do that. So they design and build them. Now, what makes these machines different than a submarine or a diving suit is that once these machines are produced, they can go on to reproduce other machines, by different sexual and asexual processes. So they're very complex machines, and there is I would say a spiritual element into it, because say if we want to get into a submarine, well, we go down to the dock, we get in the submarine, but how does the conscious self get into
the sub
body?
or the body?
That's not something that we do ourselves. That's where the spiritual element comes into it. How a conscious self is projected down into this level of reality. I mean, there is a material element to it. We can see that our bodies, our vehicles, are made of material elements: calcium, phosphorus, all these elements that are there. But the consciousness is not made of any of those elements. Of course, this is where a big debate's going to come in. Some people in this world today, especially many scientists, think that, well, if you organize matter in a sufficiently complex way in the brain, it produces consciousness. But only in connection with the brain, only in connection with matter. And when you disorganize the matter, then there's no more consciousness, none of that. So under that picture of reality, it's matter that is primary. And what we call consciousness is only a temporary byproduct of extremely complex organizations of matter. And it only occurs when those extremely complex organizations of matter are there. Otherwise, there's no consciousness. And in any particular case, say, if I'm existing as a conscious being now, at the time of death, when the chemicals in my brain disorganize, then there's no more consciousness. So under that picture of reality, it's matter that is primary, and the domination and control and exploitation of matter is the main purpose of human life. So that people in our modern human civilization are organized for that, for producing and consuming more and more material things, not for the benefit of all, because according to the current scientific theories, we're not only just machines made of matter, we're machines made of matter in competition with each other for survival. So therefore, under the influence of these ideas, we see in our human civilization today very intense levels of competition among individuals, among races, among classes, among nations, even among religions.
Mm.
There are these very intense levels of competition for control and domination and exploitation of the resources of matter. And this results in the environmental destruction that we see going on. For example, our human civilization, the way that it's organized now, requires huge amounts of oil.
Mm.
So, the nations and the big corporations, big global corporations, are trying to extract as much oil as they can from the earth. And it's so important that they do that they're prepared to risk environmental destruction in the search for ever increasing supplies of oil. And therefore, you get catastrophes like we see happening in the Gulf of Mexico now. And it will happen in other places as well. But the point is that this intense focus that we see on material production and consumption is what underlies all of these environmental catastrophes that the world is suffering and will continue to suffer.
Huh.
And it also underlies the intense levels of conflict that we see on all levels of human civilization, because we're taught in our official education systems, we are just machines made of matter. That's what we really are. And not only that, we're machines made of matter in competition with each other for survival. This is the Darwinian theory of evolution, which is taught in all the official education systems all over the world. And it's not just a scientific theory. It's a theory that's meant to keep people focused on material production and consumption. And that generates a lot of wealth that flows into the pockets of different people. It flows into the pockets of, say, scientists who are inventing weapons of mass destruction, consumer products, all kinds of pharmaceuticals, and things like that. The money flows into the pockets of the corporations that build the weapons, manufacture the pharmaceuticals and consumer products. It flows into the pockets of the governments that are taxing all this economic activity. Yeah. And we ourselves are also complicit in this.
Of course.
Because we're buying the stuff, we're working in the factories that are producing it.
We're allowing it to happen that way.
It's whole. We're all kind of tied up in this.
Yeah.
But therefore, we have to pay the price for it. We have to pay the price for it in terms of the being caught up in all these competitive things, like the huge financial crisis that the world's undergoing right now. Well, what's the result? What's the cause of that? Well, it's that everybody is out competing for as much control and domination of material resources that they can do. And some of them are winning and some of them are losing. And in that conflict, some people are going to suffer. There are people who, because of their greed and influence and power, are going to try to suck more out of the system than they're actually due. And those who are in the position of not being able to resist that are going to suffer for it. But they're also going to fight back, and therefore you get all these struggles between nations, among individuals, among different classes and societies, the bankers and the financiers and the workers and the common people and the governments and the people it's just a system that has built into it environmental destruction and conflict.
And
whether it's
and I guess, Michael, what you're saying as well is that this competition-based system is because of the current Yuga cycle, the quality of the period of time that we're in. This is, in one way, are you saying that this is meant to be like this as well? Is this for a reason?
Well, in one sense, it is meant to be like that, in the sense that every year the seasons change, and as you go into winter, it's colder weather is going to come. But that doesn't mean you have to get cold and die. It
Yeah.
means you can keep yourself warm. You can arrange to keep other people warm. You can find a way to survive, even if the climatic conditions are getting a little bit worse. Uh, so, but what's happened is that we've increased the danger to human civilization by our own actions. For example, if we had in our public education systems the idea that, okay, we're not just machines made of matter in competition with each other for survival, but we're all beings of pure consciousness who have all come from the same source. We're all related to each other. We're all part of the same spiritual family. Then this would have the effect of lessening the very intense levels of conflict that we see in the world today, which are based on seeing ourselves as different. Yeah, I'm this religion, you're that religion, you're this nationality, I'm this nationality, you're this class, I'm this class. It's all that comes from the kinds of ideas that are being promoted in our education systems. It is also partly due to the age that these things go on, but it can be resisted. Just like I said, if it's going to rain, doesn't mean you have to get wet.
Yeah.
Yes, it's going to rain, but you can protect yourself. You can organize things in such a way as to reduce the bad effects. But we're not doing that. We're just making things worse. And a lot of it starts with our sense of identity. For example, if I think I'm an American man, I'm going to behave like an American man in competition with others. If I think I'm a being of pure consciousness, we're all beings of pure consciousness. We're all coming from the same source. I'm not going to be in that competitive mood. I'm going to be in a more cooperative mood, understanding, hey, we're all in this together. We're all from the same source. We're all essentially of the same nature. Let's solve the problem. Let's not just fight for our particular group in competition with other groups, which is the way that society works today. And the reason it's like that is because of the sense of identity that we get, because through the monopoly they have in the education systems in the world today, the materialistic scientists are able to dictate to people the answers to the fundamental questions. Who am I and where did I come from? And basically the answers they're giving are quite materialistic. They're saying, well, you just evolved from chemicals. You're just an evolved ape. You're just a machine made of matter, a survival machine in competition with other survival machines. And that's the way things are. And if people think like that, which many people do, then that's going to influence the goals that you're going to set for yourself individually, and it's going to affect the goals that societies will set for themselves individually. And that's what you get is the world you see today. The environmental destruction, the wars, the economic crises. Now, fortunately, there are some people who are resisting these things, who don't want to get caught up in this game of competition and domination, exploitation and control, who are more in favor of saying, yeah, we're all in this together. We need to cooperate with each other. The main purpose of life isn't to produce and consume as much material things as possible. We should be developing the resource of consciousness, putting less of our energy into simply producing and consuming more and more material things. So the more people that feel like that, the better this world is going to be, even though the age, in terms of the cycle of ages is um,
A dark
leading.
one, or an Iron Age, basically, that we're in.
Yes,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have to. Even if the tendency is like that, you can still do things to lessen the effects of the age. Just like I said, if winter's coming on, yes, it's going to get cold. You can't stop it from getting cold, but you can protect yourself. You can protect others, by using your resources in the proper way. You can make things easier for yourself. You can survive the winter, and then the spring will come.
Huh. How
So,
long is one age or one yuga, if we look at it from that point of view? How, from the Vedic or Sanskrit, then I guess, point of view, in terms of these calendars, how long of a period are we looking at ahead of us in terms of the Kali Yuga that we are just now then maybe going into, as it were?
according to the Kali Yuga, according to the traditional sources, it began about 5,000 years ago and will continue for another 427,000 years, at which time another golden age will begin. So that means we're just entering into the Kali Yuga, and it's going to go on for a long, long time. Now, if it's always possible for any individual conscious self to get completely out of this level of reality where these cycles of time go on. You can transfer yourself. If you use the human vehicle for the actual purpose that it's intended for, you can use the human vehicle to transcend this level of reality, return to the level of pure consciousness, which is timeless, which is beyond all of these cycles of time. And so you could do that. But if you don't do that, then you come back and you'll experience the Kali Yuga get worse.
Mm.
So there's some incentive to actually use the human vehicle to transcend this level of reality. And different wisdom systems have different systems of yoga and meditation and contemplation that are meant to help us do that, restore consciousness to its original pure state.
Mm.
That's within most traditions, wisdom traditions, there's, you could say, a more external aspect to it. External forms of religion and things like that, which are often sources of conflict. That we've seen. But within these traditions, there are also more esoteric aspects that aren't so much focused on the external forms of worship, but are more focused on internal development of consciousness, purification of consciousness, transcendence of matter, and things like that. So I'm very much in favor of people exploring those kinds of systems of consciousness transformation that are there. And it's like, say, like a geologist can tell us how to extract the element gold from its ore, where it's mixed with other less valuable elements. And say, once you've extracted the gold, you could form the gold into coins, and you could stamp the symbols of different nations on the gold coins. But if it's really gold, it doesn't matter what symbol that you've stamped on it. So similarly, there are systems by which one can extract the element of pure consciousness from our existence, where this pure consciousness is now entangled with matter. And if you're actually able to do that by one of these systems, it doesn't matter what you call the system, just as long as you've gotten the result. where you see I'm a being of pure consciousness, all others are beings of pure consciousness, we're all coming from the same source, we're all part of the same family in that sense. If you're actually able to get that result, then it doesn't matter what you call the process. You could call it Islam or Christianity or Judaism or Hinduism or whatever, Australian Aboriginal consciousness or Native American consciousness or whatever. But if you've got the result, it doesn't matter, what you call it. That's the way I look at that. But now, under the current system of education, people are more or less discouraged from such things. If they're at all interested in spiritual life, they're encouraged to identify with some religious system that is in conflict with other religious systems. So it
another level of that competition based.
Yeah, it becomes another level of competition, which is unfortunate. So the whole picture of reality that I present in the book Human Devolution is a consciousness-based picture of reality. And although we've been talking about a lot of philosophical things and spiritual things in this conversation, what I try to do in the book is provide a scientific basis for thinking that consciousness-based picture of reality is the true picture of reality. And so that takes us into a lot of areas of paranormal science, investigation into what I would call the hidden history of physics that recognizes the existence of different vital forces, a conscious self that can exist apart from matter. That takes you into medical studies of out-of-body experiences, psychiatric studies of past life memories, physicists who've investigated the paranormal powers of the self, like psychokinesis, mind over matter, remote viewing, and things like that. So when we take all of these things into account, we wind up with a picture of reality that is consciousness-based rather than matter-based.
But if we look at this current age from a mainstream scientific line, I guess we can generalize and say that we see ourselves as progressing, at least if we look at it from the point of view of technology again. This is obviously explained in the terms of how you phrase it under materialism, that we're still within that confines, but out of those technological developments we get other qualities. We can communicate over the internet worldwide with other cultures and maybe even begin to bridge some of those differences that we have set up for ourselves, so to speak, which is kind of a good thing. But how would you look at the technological progression through the theory of the Yuga ages? In that sense, to me, it looks like a kind of a positive upswing. What's your take on that, Michael?
I think a lot of our technology in the Kali Yuga is an attempt to duplicate abilities that people had naturally in previous cycles. For example, you mentioned the internet, which is the idea that you can instantaneously, communicate with, people in other places. Well, if you go back to these previous ages, you'll see that people had higher levels of consciousness and were able to use those higher levels of consciousness to communicate with each other without the technology, without having to buy an iPad or an iPhone or this or that.
Right.
You could. So I think a lot of our technology in the Kali Yuga is an attempt to duplicate abilities that people once had naturally. They naturally had the ability to communicate with each other telepathically. They naturally had the ability to see things that were happening remotely. And there are even though it's the Kali Yuga, there are still some people today who have these abilities, these remote viewing abilities. I mean, one way to do remote viewing, of course, is just to do, go on Skype with your webcam, or do, now there are phones coming out that you can do, you can use, they have video cams in them, and you can do it just on your phone. But in previous ages, people had the ability to do that naturally, and some people still have these remote viewing capabilities. Once I was speaking at a conference in Montreal, an alternative science conference, and one of the other speakers there was Stephen Schwartz. It's one reason I like going to conferences. Not only do I get an opportunity to speak and put my ideas out and have people come up to me and ask me questions, I get to meet other researchers, other people, and hear what they have to say. So Stephen Schwartz was one of the researchers who was part of the remote viewing program that the United States military and intelligence agencies were operating in the 1970s and 1980s. In other words, they found, and this has been documented, they've admitted this. They may still be doing it today in secret, but the documents have come out showing that in the 1970s and 1980s, the United States government, military intelligence agencies were using remote viewing to see what was going on in the former Soviet Union. There were a lot of things they couldn't see with their satellites. And think, for example, on one occasion, they noticed that in a Russian port city, there was this huge building being constructed a few kilometers from the shore. And of course, from a satellite, you can't see. They could see the building was being constructed, but they couldn't see what was being built inside the building. So they had remote viewers look and see what was going on inside the building. And they said they're building a huge missile-carrying submarine in there, the biggest missile-carrying submarine that's ever been built. And the government officials said, well, that can't be true because this building is several miles from the coast. How are they going to get this huge, big submarine from the building to the coast, to the port? And the remote viewers looked and they saw some plans, and they said, well, in a year, when they've built the submarine, they're going to build a canal from this building to the shore, and they're going to launch the submarine that way. And later, satellite pictures showed that was true. After a year, the canal was built, and the submarine came out. They saw it. So the point is that some people still are able to manifest a lot of these powers that we're trying to duplicate with our technology. And of course, the technology is tied into material production and consumption, which means you have to pay for it. And, there's, profit considerations, and there's competition among the different companies that are offering these things, and the governments want to control what's going on with the web and the internet and this and that. So you're getting the technology, but you're also getting all the people who want to exploit the technology,
Sure.
for their selfish purposes, which means you get the viruses, you get the scams, you get the spam, you get, there's a price to pay for it. So, anyways,
it's interesting to note though also that this kind of parapsychology aspect or in terms of remote viewing, that in this day and age, it's being used by institutions who kind of is the cusp of materialism, if you will. The military are going into these fields in order to explore, to at the end of the day, for materialistic purposes, if you will, for this competitive-based thing. But it's still a very, very interesting point, obviously. Absolutely.
So that's the so whether we're talking about the paranormal technologies or the material technologies, they can be used for either good or evil, you could say.
Sure, sure.
It depends on the consciousness of the people involved. Like you said, the internet, the web, can provide a way for breaking down a lot of these barriers, but they can also, those same technologies can also be used to, they can be exploited in such a way as to increase these things. It's and there are lots of debates about who's going to control the web and access to it, and different nations are now starting to control it, block sites and this and that. But ultimately, and then there are other kinds of people trying to use it for their own purposes. So what's really important is not the technology itself, you could say, but the consciousness of the people that are using it, which is why I always go back to the consciousness aspect of things. And the focus on technology is something that is a result of certain decisions that were made 4 or 5 centuries ago in Europe. Because if you go back to Western Europe 4 or 5 centuries ago, they had a picture of reality that was very much like the picture of reality that I'm talking about, a picture of reality that involved vital forces, consciousness, the idea that there's intelligent beings all over the cosmos, that we live in a multi-level cosmos that's inhabited by different sorts of beings adapted to the features of existence on these different levels, that there are more subtle realms of intelligent life and things of that sort. These were very common ideas, even in the West, even in Western Europe 4 or 5 centuries ago. But around that time, certain groups of scientists got together and decided, well, we just have to focus on matter that we can control in our experiments and get predictable, reproducible results. We can't be dealing with all this alchemical stuff and spiritual stuff that requires a whole different mindset. They wanted to just focus on matter. And it was very productive in the sense that they learned how to control matter in some very interesting ways, and that's the source of all our technologies. But by leaving out these other aspects of reality, by marginalizing these other aspects of reality, they did get a huge benefit in terms of technology, but we can see that there's a downside to that, because with the technologies have also come the wars, the economic crises, the environmental destruction, the intense levels of conflict that we see in the world today, and the increasing levels of unhappiness that we see in people all over the world. They're very disappointed with the lives that they've been given, in the sense that yes, they work very hard, but then they find their pensions disappear, their jobs disappear, it becomes a very frustrating situation that, well, yeah, we've got all this great technology, but because we've left out, we've marginalized these other aspects of reality, there's a cost, that. So I think it's a question of balance. Say, like, if you're eating too much of the wrong kinds of food, it's going to be bad for your health. You're not going to feel as full of energy as you should. You're going to suffer for different reasons. But the solution isn't to stop eating. The solution is to eat the right amounts of the right kinds of food.
Right.
And that may mean cutting down on the amount of food that you're eating and and being more selective in the kinds of food that you're eating. So in terms of this technology, it's not a question of eliminating technology. It's having the right kinds of technologies that are, because I think what we should be using our technology for is to find ways of producing the material necessities of life in the most natural, efficient way possible.
Right.
You know, and that means not trying to give people, get them to buy as much as possible consumer goods. What they need, what they actually need to live in this world in a nice way. So we should be using our technologies. We shouldn't be trying to eliminate technology. I think technology can be part of the solution. I think a lot of people in the tech industries, the IT industries, are actually trying to do that, but because they're working in a system that demands that they produce in such a way that they survive in the intense levels of competition that there are in the economic world today, they wind up overproducing, overconsuming,
and even to be argued further, a lot of the technological developments are being run by defense budgets, and it's a lot of military gear also that actually could be argued that most of the technological advances have been because of a need from a military point of view, television, radio, telegraph, etc. So,
well, what a lot of people don't realize is that, like computer games, people are very much into games now. Computer game industry is now bigger than Hollywood. Everybody's involved in producing these computer games, playing them, virtual reality systems. It's like, what many people don't realize is that the technology for those games was invented for war gaming purposes. Like the militaries, they want to be able to have a way to say they have, they're going to have a tank battle. All right, you got 1,000 tanks, fighting 1,000 tanks, and they want to have. There are a couple ways you can do that. You can actually put 2,000 tanks out in the desert and run war games. Another way to do it is to do it virtually, where you have individual operators in their individual virtual tanks fighting on a virtual battlefield. And that's where the computer gaming industry comes from. It's, they used to talk about the military industrial complex. Now there's the military entertainment complex. So the companies that developed those wargaming virtual reality systems for the militaries were licensed to then spin them off as consumer games.
And they can analyze stats and data even by games that are being played online in order to predict combat outcomes and things like that.
Sure, like that. So you're right about that. But still, you get some interesting games out of it. So I guess
that's true. That is true. We can always learn from everything, and at the end of the day, obviously, again, the whole concept of the video game, I think, gives people a good reference frame in terms of what we are experiencing on this planet. I always make the comparison that there's always someone behind the keyboard and the mouse, as it were, and I think that's true in our own case as well, if you will. Our spirit is the higher operator, and the body is just the game character, if you will, to make an analogy to that.
Yes, I think that's a very good way of looking at it. I would say, again, making use of the analogies from these films like The Matrix and Avatar, that's our situation. We're in a virtual reality situation, but just like the person who's playing a role in a computer game has a reality apart from that. Similarly, we also do that, but we've sort of forgotten it, and sometimes we need to be woken up, to that fact.
Yeah.
So that's the main message I tried to get across in my book, Human Devolution, that we're beings of pure consciousness ultimately that have devolved or been projected down into this level of reality where we function in these vehicles into which our consciousness has been projected on this level of reality. That's our system. Now, what we are really, apart from that, See, in the games are usually done. Of course, now they have some games that are cooperative games. They're not as popular as the competitive games where you try to kill your opponents. Basically.
Mm.
Is that true or
Oh,
not true?
I think that would be true. I'm not too much involved in the video game arena myself these days. I think that the majority still are shoot 'em up, as they call it, third-person
Yeah.
shooter. You just sort of walk around and kill people. That's basically it.
or other sites of competitive zero-sum games.
Right.
So that's. But we have an existence apart, from that. That's my message, and we should be trying to. The main purpose of human life, as I see it, is the elevation of consciousness,
right?
Purification of consciousness. That's what I see as the main purpose.
I want you to mention your websites, and obviously, again, you mentioned that you had a kind of a booklet, I guess, with a collection of some of your articles out there, as well as a kind of a crash course, if you will, into the idea and theories surrounding forbidden archaeology. Why don't you tell our listeners how they can get a copy of those and your books, of course, as well on the web or Amazon or whatever site you have out there, Michael, to give to our listeners?
Okay, the first stop for anyone wanting to know about my work and books would be my personal website, mcremo.com, mcremo.com. So if anyone goes there, they can see what interviews I'll be giving, what my travel schedule is. There's an opportunity to purchase books. There's a museum of forbidden archaeology, so they can visit mcremo.com, mcremo.com. And if they're on Facebook, they could go to my mcremo Facebook page, become a friend. As far as the book, The Forbidden Archaeologist, that's coming out in November, so they're not able to get that immediately, but it will be coming out later this year in a few months, and they can look for that when it comes out. So those are some ways that people can get in touch. And of course, my books are available. They're available on hundreds of websites all over the world. So, but if they want to visit my personal website and pick them up from there, that would be nice. I'm a disabling disease. Stephen Hawking. He's recently said yes, there's extraterrestrial life. So I think we're not just alone in the universe. We're part of a whole cosmic society of beings, and in any society there's some system of government. It's so I think it works like that ultimately. So and then another sense I use the word devolution is in terms of the ongoing cycles of time. As you might know, and many of your listeners might know, a lot of my work is inspired by my studies in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India,
yes,
in which there's a cyclical concept of time. Time doesn't just go linearly; it goes in cycles, and this is a very common idea in many of the ancient wisdom traditions. Many people are talking about the Mayan calendar, for example, which has also this same concept of vast cycles of time. They believe, according to that calendar, the way many people read it, is that in the year 2012, it's going to be the end of one of the cycles and the beginning of another cycle. So the ancient Greeks and Romans and all types of people throughout history have had the idea of time going in vast cycles. So that is there in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India as well. And these cycles go in a certain sequence. They're called yugas, for example. That's one of the Sanskrit terms for the cycle of repeating cycles of ages. And there are basically four of them. They start out with a golden age in which everything on Earth is very environmentally perfect. People are able to live very simply and naturally without complex social structures and cities and things like that.
Mm.
But then as the cycles go on, things become progressively more materialistic. Or if it hasn't gotten to that level yet, it will continue on in another vehicle, which may be a human vehicle, but if we haven't used the human vehicle properly, it could be another type of vehicle, an animal vehicle, for example.
Mm.
It's just like any vehicle, you require a license to operate it. For example, if you want to drive an automobile, you need an automobile license. If you want to fly an airplane, you need a pilot's license. If you want to be a ship's captain, you need a ship's captain's license. So to occupy a particular vehicle, one requires a particular license to operate that vehicle. So if we don't have the license to operate a human vehicle, then that means we'll be put in another type of vehicle. So that's another type of evolution or devolution.
Mm.
One can make progress in the cycle of reincarnation, going to, from lower forms of vehicles to higher forms of vehicles, or from lower forms of bodies to higher forms of bodies, or one can go back in the other direction. Yeah, I use the word, devolution in several senses. The main sense that I use it in the book, Human Devolution, a Vedic alternative to Darwin's theory, is that we don't evolve up from matter, as many scientists now believe. Rather, we devolve or come down from a level of pure consciousness. So that's one sense in which I use the word, devolution. We haven't come up from matter, but down from a level of pure consciousness or spirit, if you like that word. So that's one sense in which I use the word. And then another sense I use the word is in terms of reincarnation, because I believe that the conscious self on this level of reality inhabits a material vehicle, that we call a body, but only temporarily. We see that, say, for example, the human vehicle that we have, it lasts a certain number of years, and then it breaks down. At that point, the conscious self would either go back to the level of pure consciousness where there is no need for any such vehicle. And in that sense, one can lose the right to occupy a human body and be placed in another kind of body that's more suited to the types of desires that the conscious self has.
But who do you think is overseeing that process?
I think there's a source for all conscious beings that's carrying on this process. There's a cosmic government, you might say, that's responsible for these things. Just like in our human societies, we see that certain people are responsible for carrying out different processes. Same thing is going on in the whole cosmic hierarchy of beings of which we're a part.
Mm.
We're not alone in the universe. There are other beings in the universe. It's interesting that even mainstream scientists like Hawking, that famous astrophysicist, the one who's in the wheelchair, little suffering from